And you think the costs are competitive?
Yes.
And have you proved anywhere that you can actually do this?
Right. So there are about 40 different companies developing technology, and we have a technology company. So the Free Flow Power is two companies. There's a Free Flow Power Development Corporation, which General Creer is the chairman of, and there's a technology company that's developing our own technology, because none of these are so advanced that we can just buy them off the shelf. We're looking at all of the technologies. There are companies that have been around longer than we have and that have actually put these in the water. The one in the United States that I would say is the furthest along is Verdant Power, who's put about a dozen turbines in the East River in New York. And there are various designs. There's about half a dozen companies in Europe that have designed a product. All of these will depend on mass production to get the cost down, because we're not talking about big hydro turbines that generate a huge amount of energy and you can pay $250,000 or $1 million for, which is the cost of a conventional hydro turbine. So these have to be very cheap to achieve the goals we're talking about, which means mass producing a smaller, simpler turbine that will get a small amount of energy, and no one is at that mass production level yet. We have a turbine unit that we've tested. We are actually manufacturing our second generation now. We expect to be putting those in the water this summer. But the goal that we all need to get to is to mass produce a cost-effective turbine. I would mention to you that the reason the development part of this is so important at the same time is that hydro takes much longer to get through a regulatory process than almost any other renewable energy, maybe almost any other type of energy other than maybe a nuclear plant. It takes about 3 to 5 years at least, and I think 3 is an awfully optimistic number. So we're engaging in the regulatory process with the turbines that we have, so that by the time we get through a regulatory process, we will actually be able to mass produce turbines. Otherwise, you're going to take a 3 to 5 year process to develop a mass production device, and then you're going to start over, and it's 10 years before you've actually got something operating in the water.
Thank you. I think we'll go to Congressman Shuler, and then maybe we'll wrap up by asking each of you if you have anything you'd like to say, anything else you'd like to say to us. We'll start, when we do that, we'll start with Ms. Eckstein, let her go first.
Mr. Ramsey, help us, is your manufacturing company looking at the energy companies, or are you looking at the residential households?
No, it's definitely larger utility scale locations. It can be a rooftop application used in industrial or commercial settings, but the most cost-effective way that we can play a part in the business is large scale.
What is the actual rate of return on the investment? How many years is typically on the rate of return? I mean, because that's what the bottom line to all of us. We want to look at what the bottom line is, what will it be able to produce, and what's going to cost us.
Well, there are typical models that are the typical power purchase agreement type models that are the standard now, that extend rate of return out beyond 10 years.
What about you guys? What do you have?
Our model is a much more simplified model that we have shown in the 5 to 6 year range. So it could possibly be half of today's standard.
Well, let me ask one question, Mr. We were talking about capacity factor. I'm going to ask you this, Mr. Hoagland, before we go to Ms. Eckstein. Capacity factor in production is very confusing to me, and I think it is to most people, even to TVA sometimes, as Mr. Sansom said. When we're talking about a nuclear plant, or you're talking about your underwater river turbine, you're talking about producing electricity almost all the time. So if we describe it as 600 megawatts, your production will be nearly 600 megawatts. Is that right?
Yeah, and we have a capacity factor. It's about 4 times that number. So for example, for regulatory filings, FERC wants to know what's the capacity factor.
You'd say 2,400.
Yes, so we just don't
But
use.
600 is the production of
Yes,
electricity.
Yes, at two and a quarter, at a river water speed of about 4.5 miles an hour. The reason we use that is because we find the whole use of the capacity number.
Very, now, so let me just go to Mr. Hogan. Now, compare that to the Buffalo Mountain Wind Farm, to the free flow discussion. What is the actual production? You described it as a 30 megawatt wind farm. How much electricity does it actually produce?
Yeah, when you look at the capacity factor, particularly for Buffalo Mountain, it's around 18 to 20%. So if it's 30 megawatts, then on average you get 18 to 20% of that energy out of that 30 megawatts.
So it actually produces 5 to 6 megawatts.
Correct. And then the other dimension that makes this complicated to think about sometimes is it's when do you get that 5 to 6 megawatts. In the case of Buffalo Mountain, you generally get it in the late evening because the winds around here are generated as the warmer air blows up the side of the mountain as the earth begins to cool off.
Yeah. And how much unused electricity does TVA have in the late evening typically?
Well, as we move to late evening, that's off of our peak. So generally then we have all of our bigger generating units are beginning to back off. We're shutting down our hydro. So we have a lot of excess.
You have several thousand megawatts of unused electrical power at night, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So if Mr. Irvin were to come and try to sell you 600 megawatts of electricity that was only available at night, you wouldn't be very interested, would you?
No, that's not the time we need it.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. This is very interesting. We, and I'm sure those who've been nice enough to come today to be in the audience, I thank you for being here. I'm sure you've got lots of questions. I'm sure the witnesses will stick around for a few minutes in case you do, and I will, and perhaps Congressman Shuler can as well. So if we could take 2 or 3 minutes and ask each of you if there's anything else you'd like to tell us, or those who are here, we'd like to hear from you. And let's start, Sextine, with you.
Well, thank you. Let me just point out what may be obvious to most people, but solar energy is available and it's most efficient during the daytime hours when people are washing their clothes and using their air conditioners and factories are running. So that's one of the high points of solar, is that it is available during the peak load periods during the day. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is just to reemphasize that solar is in the emerging stages of the market. It's in the emerging stages of its technology development. It's very similar in my mind to what we were back in the early 80s in electronics, when I started in the electronics industry. And I can just see the innovation and the amount of investment and creativity that's going into taking photons and turning them into electricity. So that's all very encouraging. The cost of solar will come down with time, with technology development, and with deploying economy of scale. So there is a very bright future for solar and for, in fact, a very broad portfolio of renewable options. So well, thank you.
We hope Tennessee, with the university and the governor's interest in the Oak Ridge Laboratory, is a center of innovation for solar activity over the next number of years. Jason.
Well, we also are very favorable for the outlook for solar, clearly. We are happy to make an investment for manufacturing capacity, which will lead to some of the economies of scale and ripple into the economics of the supply chain. We also are happy to be working on new and improved models that as I mentioned before, that don't use the typical power purchase agreement model that we've grown accustomed to, in a bit of a dogmatic model. There are changes that can be made to the entire investment structure that we focus on that strategy, as well as the manufacturing of the modules to supply the market. So we have a lot of opportunity.
Thank you very much. Mr. Irving, General Creer.
I guess I would say that the most important thing that's happened in our area in the last several years is the leveling of a playing field with other renewables, recognizing hydrokinetics and qualified hydro. And for these very low impact types of hydropower, I think it is time to let them compete because if the goal is to get to a low fossil fuel use in the most cost-effective way, giving many alternatives the opportunity to compete for that low-cost alternative is the right approach. And I think that's going to have a huge impact on the ability to do that. And I think this is, I think, very important for the Tennessee Valley. Having a definition for renewable electricity standard that is the same as for the investment tax credit that was just passed is very important for qualified hydro and for hydrokinetics. So I think if that's the single most important thing Congress could do for this area of renewable energy.
Heath, I've noticed that too as I've worked on this. Any suggestions that any of you have for how Congress can support emerging technologies in a technology neutral way would be, in other words, to make all of you eligible for it, would be very helpful. Solar had a real problem with that for about 5 or maybe 10, 12 years. Apparently you have as well until this year. So if you have specific suggestions, we'd welcome them.
I can make one if you, that has to do with the advanced energy investment credit. And this, has a cost to it because I'm sure the reason it was limited was the concern about it being hard to quantify. But there is an advanced energy investment credit that is available to manufacturers of advanced energy equipment. So it would include solar, would include all of these things. But it's similar to the new market tax credit in which someone has to actually go and apply and get a grant. And that's a very cumbersome process for anyone who's in the technology development business. And it's very uncertain as to whether you're going to get it, so it's hard to make investment decisions. So I think a credit that's like the traditional investment tax credit, where if you are building a plant or investing in equipment that does these things, you can claim the credit, would be a huge improvement on that program.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Just a brief statement that the other thing I think you could probably help in Congress is that Dan mentioned it's going to take about 3 years optimistically to go through the regulatory process to even get us to be able to produce in the waters. And so perhaps it's time to relook at those kind of requirements, especially in terms of renewable energy, because that really is a hindrance, because again, we're trying to bring something on new, but we still have the old rules that we played for when we were, again, living in the Stone Age. So I think you could help us by reviewing those requirements, and certainly we don't want to take shortcuts. We want to make sure we take care of the environment. I think we could speed up the process.
Thank you. Dr. Mason.
I guess I'd kind of like to close by saying I think we do have a unique opportunity here in the Tennessee Valley because of the presence of a public utility and a large energy lab. And I think that particularly as we try and explore things like the smart grid and renewable energy and the reprocessing of spent nuclear fuel, the opportunity that exists to take advantage of the fact that as a public utility, TVA has a public good element of mission, which really isn't reflected in the mission of an investor-owned utility, creates, I think, a rationale for trying to do some things that would then have broader benefit in the private sector utilities, but where initially you're taking on additional risk. And I think with both TVA and the Bonneville Power Authority, those kind of possibilities exist. The challenge is that I don't think if a BPA or a TVA is undertaking as part of their public good mission the exploration of some of these advanced technologies, that it may not be reasonable to ask the ratepayers in the Tennessee Valley or in the Northwest, in the areas served by BPA, to fully carry the burden of that cost and risk. So in the spirit of offering up suggestions, that might be something one could explore as the nation undertakes this very substantial push on energy. Are there ways that we can use our public utilities to innovate as part of their public service mission, and develop things that will be of benefit to the investor-owned utilities, but do it in a way where we're not solely carrying it on the backs of the ratepayers in the region?
Thanks, Dr. May. We'll follow up on that. Thank you. Mr. Hoagland.
Well, as we look forward to meeting a renewable standard or reducing our carbon footprint, It looks like to us that really to be successful, we're going to need all of the tools that we've talked about today. We need all of the different generating sources. We need energy efficiency. We need the smart grid. And they're all going to have to work together in order to be able to really be effective. We can't just limit it to one or two particular renewables. But if we put them all together, I do think we can make significant progress.
Mr. Sampson?
I want to thank again for us being here. And Tom, thank you for that comment, because it makes me think that, I think Senator Alexander, you talked about in Nashville in January that 10% of the ratepayer to NES couldn't pay their power bills in January. And of course, it all comes back to roost on us at TVA, is that if we're hearing all this and trying to do all these things, sooner or later the ratepayer has to pay, because we get no appropriations from Congress. And that's the pressure we have, because when you talk about, we went out for these wind bids, and our rates today from TVA are about $65 a megawatt. And if we're out there at $80, or even solar, we had some proposals way over $100, it's hard for us to move that back to the ratepayer and not get beat up pretty harshly about it. So that's a challenge. You know, we talk about this stuff and it sounds good, and then we got to put it in our power source and pay for it. And even our wind sources are in that 60, you know, the best case $65 area, which is where our prices are today. And so we have to balance the cost of nuclear, cost of coal, and cost of these other sources, and sooner or later that balance has to come out when we make decisions with the rates. And Heath, I might mention, I put one of those meters you're talking about on my house that gives you the price. In fact, this particular one would tell me instantaneously what my power bill would be if I stayed where I was, and it would tell me what my monthly power bill if I was there. And we used it for a while. I might mention the technology in there because the darn thing doesn't work very much. But anyway, also my wife paid attention, you know, when she's turning the dryer on and turning the hair dryer or something on, because it really makes a big difference. And you're right about that. But again, we've got an issue with our customers, our 158 utility customers, that have a hard time figuring out how to spend the money to put these meters and those kind of things on the house. So, and Tom, I thank you again, because we do have to put all this to the ratepayers. So that's the balance we have to accept as a board at TVA, is how we do that. And I do appreciate these ideas. And Lamar, I might say, I want to say your meeting in Nashville about electric cars, it should pay heavily in this, because we've already got the energy to charge these cars at night, and that's already there. And so I think, in addition to these sources, and I like the idea of solar, and by the way, I put solar on my house in 1978, I want you to know. I've had solar panels on my house, and I couldn't afford it, but I just like the idea, and maybe we need more of those people doing that. But anyway, I just want to come back and remind you that we do have to end up with a competitive price issue at some point in what we have to do in balancing these issues.
Congressman Shuler, any last word?
I just want to thank you and your staff for help hosting this meet, and to all the panel. What a great testimony that you gave today, and things that we can actually take back and work on. And I think we've kind of looked at one another a couple of times and said that's something we need to work on together. So I look forward to working with the senator and his staff, and making some of these long-term visions that we can't just look at 2 and 4 years out. It needs to be 5, 10, 15 years out, and in order for us to get back our independence.
Thank you. We'll circulate this to the other members, the other congressional members of the caucus, and to the media. I want to thank the witnesses and thank the audience. As I listen to this, if I were in the private sector and able to make investments, which I can't do where I am, I would bet on 3 things as I look to the future. The first would be conservation. It's just astonishing to me how much electricity we waste. I mean, the very idea that we use 43% more electricity than the national average. If we just get it down to normal, it would be the same, as I mentioned, of 4 nuclear power plants. That's one. Two, solar for the longer term, finding some way to have a mini Manhattan project, as I proposed at Oak Ridge last year, to make solar cost competitive. As soon as it is, it'll be widely used, and as Ms. Eckstein pointed out, even though it's an intermittent power source, when it's on is the time when most of us need it. So that's it. That would be my bet. And then the third would be the electric cars and trucks. At one time that sounded pretty zany, but it's not zany because most of the car manufacturers are going to be making them by this year. I'm driving one today. And second, TVA, like every other utility in the country, TVA has 6 or 7 nuclear power plants worth of unused electrical capacity at night, which is probably the greatest asset we have in the Tennessee Valley, and we could electrify our cars and trucks, plug them in, and save us money and really change the country. And I'm fascinated with the underwater river turbines. If it works out as described, it ought to be very helpful in the southeastern United States. Thank you very much.
I got a converted
Pardon me? Oh, yeah.
hybrid. It's a Prius, and A123 put a larger electric battery in it. And so it starts out with the electric battery, but if it runs out, then I've still got another one. And it doesn't get every
Term impact of these houses, these $5,000 per home, be able to utilize that money and upgrade their efficiency of their home. Well, I guess sometimes we feel like we think that the solar panels, the voltaics are modernized and that they're at the brink of being utmost efficiency, but we're looking at, they're talking about these second and third generations, when we're just really getting to understand the first generations, and we look, the long-term impact will be to lower the overall cost of the solar panels, so it'll be more cost-effective to be able to purchase and put them on our private homes. Do you have any questions? Anybody else?
From Chattanooga to Bristol, so you're selling 1/4 the electricity watts bar. Where does that come from?
I figured it out. Our staff did the research. Turbines have to be a certain amount of distance from one another. And in fact, it would go on up into Virginia. The point I was trying to make is that we have choices with renewable energy. Solar, to me, is a good choice. The underwater river turbines is a good choice. Putting an unbroken line of 500-foot wind turbines from Bristol to Chattanooga, to me, is a bad choice, and we don't have to do it because we have other options.
Any comments about TVA cleanup in Kingston and how that's all setting in Congress?
Well, we're as unhappy about it as TVA is, and the ratepayers will be even more unhappy when we get the bill. But it has to be done. I just think it reminds us that we need to make a special effort with our coal plants, as long as we use coal, and we're going to be using it for a while, to use it in a clean way. For example, I've introduced legislation to put strict rules nationally on sulfur, nitrogen, and mercury, so that we can have clean air in the Smoky Mountains and in North Carolina and East Tennessee. We need to go ahead and do that. We can't pretend like we're going to suddenly stop using coal next week. We're not. So if we're going to have it, let's do it in a clean way as we accelerate our effort to use solar and to find other ways to conserve energy.
And one way we lessen the overall production and burning of the coal is to actually conserve the energy that we produce, that we consume. The more we can lower our consumption, then we're going to lower the overall the greenhouse emissions into the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Unless you want to comment on Lane Kiffin at all.
I'm going to go see him, so here in a few minutes. So. No, 1 year left.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all so much.
Did you meet Heath?
We all should have won it.
Right. We've already practiced now, so we can say it really well.
That's right.
Jim, can you you make that.
Just fit this in, or whether I need to.
Can you take the bottom
break
off?
it? Yeah, that's what it's gonna have to be.
Bottom half?
Yeah.
You going to the orange and white game?
We got all of our county conventions this next week, so I try to go and get as many of those as I can.
There they go. Oh, well, this takes a mechanical bend. Here we go.
Some of the environmental groups suggested that one of the maybe an ulterior goal of this forum is to derail the notion of 20 by 2020 as impractical. Is the goal of 20 by 2020 impractical?
Well, I think for Tennessee that it will be very difficult for us to make 10% of our electricity from the wind, the solar, and the earth in 10 years. Now, we've heard some ideas today which are promising, the idea of underwater river turbines. What I would like to see TVA spend more of its money doing is focusing on conservation. I mean, if we spent the money we're spending on wind power by giving light bulbs to everybody in the TVA Valley, we could save the building of one entire nuclear power plant, which is 1,000 megawatts instead of 5 megawatts. So conservation first, nuclear power second, and after that, I think electric cars in the region would do the most to have clean electricity.
How much time would we buy in enabling that type of conservation program in order to be enacted, and what exactly does it buy? It's a time.
Well, the advantage of conservation is that we can do it immediately. Renewable energy may take a while to develop. We all hope solar is going to be something we can all use, but it's going to be years before it's cost competitive. But we can start today to change light bulbs, to weatherize our homes, as Congressman Shuler has said. And by doing that, we could, if we just used as much electricity as the national average instead of leading the country in electricity use, we could avoid using 4 nuclear power plants or 9 coal plants. So that's how much we could save by conservation. Congressman Shuler may want to comment.
Without a doubt that conservation is the way that we are able to impact the most immediately. Within 3 years, we can re-weatherize a person's home. One of the statistics that we've most recently seen is if every person in the United States was given $5,000 to retrofit their home with window strips, insulation, and windows, then we would be able to lower over 300. We would take 300 coal burning plants away. We would not have to utilize 300 coal burning plants in the United States with only $5,000 per person, which in return is twice. If you gave North Carolina, for an example, you gave everyone in North Carolina $5,000 per home to be able to retrofit their home, you would then take away 2 nuclear plants, and that would be the cost of only 1 nuclear plant to do that.
Do you see it as a starter?
It has to be a starter. That's the way we're able to get that until the technologies get to the point so they are cost effective. So that coal is still not the cheapest way. We want to make solar the cheapest way, and other alternative sustainable resources the cheaper way to do it, not the natural resources or the coal burning or even the nuclear.
For both of you gentlemen, do you see clean coal as a myth? Do you see clean coal as a technology worth pouring millions of dollars into research to try to achieve?
We should have a mini Manhattan project to make solar cost competitive, and we need a mini Manhattan project for clean coal. We should reserve a Nobel Prize for the scientist who figures out what to do about the carbon from existing coal-burning power plants. We know what to do with the nitrogen, sulfur, and mercury, and we should be doing it immediately. If we figure out carbon, then we'll be energy independent, we'll have low-cost electricity, we'll have plenty of jobs, we can heat our homes. So we have to keep a focus on clean coal.
Do you see solar as taking the lead over coal in terms of the research dollars?
Well, it'll be no, I don't think it should. I mean, if you make 50% of your electricity from coal, and if you make 1/100th of 1% from solar, and if you have R&D challenges out ahead of you, you should spend plenty of money trying to figure out how to deal with
how to deal with the coal. We want solar, but the smart way to do something is the fast way to do something. Our goal is clean electricity and clean energy at a low, reliable cost so we can keep our jobs here and sending them overseas.
What do you hope the players take away from this forum today? What do you hope the public takes away from it?
Well, I hope the public looks at it from the conservation and how much work we do have to do with research and development from some of the technologies that are truly on the brink of making us more energy independent. The underwater turbines along with the solar is the opportunity, because we ultimately do have to shift away from coal. That has to be our goal ultimately, is to lessen all the carbon and the greenhouse emissions.
Y'all going to sponsor legislation or co-sponsor legislation for a $5,000 conservation credit, or how's this going to work?
Well, that's something we'll continue to work on and talk about. We'll see how that works.
We like working together. We heard a number of good ideas today that we'll talk to our colleagues about, and you're likely to see legislation come out of this forum.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Especially student life.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Give Kiffin my best.
I sure will.
Heard him on the radio.